Hey everyone, welcome back to more HOA Karen stories. In this video, an entitled racist HOA Karen summoned the police on me simply because she thought I was too Asian and too casually dressed to be the owner of a yellow Porsche. Major mistake on her part, considering my family holds the title to the very land her Homeowners Association sits on. But before we get to that, let's jump into a story where Opie gets a tyrannical HOA lawyer stripped of his license. So the first story goes like this. Not me personally, but one of my closest friends lived inside an HOA about 18 years back. Things were completely fine for several years at the start. Then one day, the whole situation flipped. We both worked as mechanics, but he also had a second source of income, a gun shop and shooting range. The shop was really busy in the evenings, and while the range had open hours for the general public, many of the prime time slots were reserved for paying members. They had recently kicked off construction on the range to add more lanes and accommodate higher caliber weapons. Because of the ongoing construction, the range was frequently shut down with just a handful of hours available for members only, and they weren't taking on any new members at that time. That right there is what set everything in motion. His neighbor directly across the street, the HOA president, wanted access to the range. My buddy had to explain that the only available slots were reserved for current members. The president pushed for a special exception, which my buddy simply couldn't make happen. And from that point forward, the president made my buddy's life absolutely miserable. He started receiving fines for the most trivial, ridiculous things you can imagine. His townhome had a garage where he kept a project car stored. There wasn't enough room inside to actually work on it, so it just sat there. During the winter months, he'd move it over to another friend's garage to work on it there. Every single time my friend rolled his motorcycle out or took the trash through the garage, the moment the president caught a glimpse of that unfinished car, a fine would appear. Each and every time, just for opening the garage door. The fines were being issued for supposedly working on a vehicle within the HOA. So he started hauling the trash cans through the interior of the house and started parking his motorcycle in the living room. At one point, a neighbor got a flat tire and my buddy helped him change it. Another fine arrived for working on a car, and the neighbor got hit with one too. Countless other petty violations followed. The HOA employed a groundskeeper and general handyman who answered directly to the president. This guy handled odd jobs around the complex, snow plowing, maintaining the grounds and public areas, that kind of thing. Well, my friend caught this man hopping his fence and snooping around his backyard. He sent his dog after him, then pinned him face down in a pile of dog waste at gunpoint until the police showed up. The man was arrested for trespassing, and it came out that he was in the country illegally, and he was deported. The HOA was then hit with a fine for having an undocumented worker on the payroll. And almost immediately, my buddy received a massive fine. Ironically, for the exact same dollar amount the HOA had been fined for supposedly owning a firearm and restraining one of their employees. A pile of fabricated charges. The HOA president happened to be an ambulance chaser attorney, and every single fine was being issued directly through his own law office. Well, my buddy's uncle was a lawyer in another state and connected him with a local attorney to deal with all of this nonsense. That's when they discovered that our state had a specific rule prohibiting the issuance of fines in direct retaliation for receiving fines. On top of that, the HOA president using his private practice to issue those fines was flat out illegal. In the end, the HOA president was disbarred and hit with criminal charges for harassment. All the fines were thrown out, and the president ultimately lost his home and had to move away. And on top of all that, my buddy actually moved out himself about a year later when he purchased a bigger house. I still laugh thinking about all that insanity that went down back around 2008. And hey, if you're enjoying these HOA stories, and by the way, this particular one came from Ask Reddit, I had to do some serious digging to find it. Please don't forget to hit like on the video and drop some star emojis in the comments if you really want to go the extra mile. Either way, the next one is the title story, and it's called HOA Karen called the police on an Asian woman for owning a Porsche 911 GT3 RS and instantly regretted it. So this is posted on a throwaway account because my family's business is the kind of boring that's also extremely identifiable. And I'm not about to have my aunt's neighbors reverse image searching her roof tiles. Also, yes, this took place in Southeast Asia. And no, I'm not naming the country to protect my anonymity. Anyway, I'm an Asian woman somewhere in that late 30s to early 40s range where strangers genuinely can't tell if you're a retired mother, a yoga instructor, or possibly both. I manage a branch of my family's agricultural business. Think rice, coconut, something you consume every single day without ever giving it a second thought. It's work that involves warehouses, serious money, sensible shoes, and arguments about fertilizer. We've earned a lot of money and have been in this industry for decades. I don't look wealthy, for the record. I'm basically always dressed like I'm about 5 minutes away from checking a pump motor. Yoga pants, an oversized shirt, hair tossed into a messy bun, and absolutely no makeup. If you spotted me at a supermarket, you'd probably assume I was there picking up ginger and leafy greens. My one, I'm an adult and nobody can stop me. Indulgence is my car. A bright yellow Porsche 911 GT 3RS. And before anyone chimes in with the must be nice comment, it's not some family money bought me a toy situation. My parents are comfortable, but they're also very much in the we don't waste money camp. I bought it with my own earnings after several strong years in the business. And because I've always genuinely loved cars. It's loud. It's ridiculous. It's perfect. Anyway, my elderly aunt lives in a gated subdivision that caters to foreign expats and local upper middle class families who want a guardhouse, tidy hedges, and a Facebook group where people treat dogs barking as though it's a human rights crisis. I visit my aunt regularly, not every single week, but often enough that the security guards usually recognize me on sight. The only thing different about this particular day was that my usual everyday car was in for servicing. So I decided to take the Porsche because I had some errands to run along the way and I wanted the enjoyable drive. Simple as that. No showing off, no agenda whatsoever. I pulled into the street and immediately remembered exactly why I don't typically bring it here. The speed bumps are brutal, the turns are narrow, and the car announces its presence like a firework going off. I park in front of my aunt's house and grab a bag of fruit and groceries from the passenger seat that I'd picked up for her because she loves pretending she doesn't need anyone's help and then quietly lighting up when someone shows up at her door with mangoes. I was halfway to her gate when I heard it. The classic territorial call. Across the street stood the HOA president. I'm going to call her Karen because honestly, it fits, and because she essentially introduced herself as one within the first few minutes. She's a foreign expat woman, not Asian, who lives like she's been personally appointed queen of the entire street. She's always carrying a clipboard, always wearing a hat, always wearing an expression like she's caught a whiff of something suspicious. I'd seen her before. She'd once tried to pressure my aunt into doing renovations. She'd lodged complaints about my aunt's older fence. And she had once suggested, in a tone that made it clear it was not actually a suggestion, that my aunt's garden looked untidy and outdated. For the record, my aunt's house is older than half the neighborhood. It's not falling apart. It simply doesn't look like a resort. My aunt likes it that way. Anyway, Karen made a beeline straight for me. She started with the fake friendly approach. You know the tone. The I'm being perfectly polite because there are witnesses, but I'm lighting you up in my head voice. Can I help you? I kept walking and said, no thanks, I'm just visiting my aunt, and gestured toward the house like any normal person would. Karen's eyes didn't follow my gesture to the house. They went straight to the car, then back to me, like she was trying to reconcile two puzzle pieces that personally offended her. That is Mrs. Aunt's house, she said, putting emphasis on the Mrs. as though my aunt somehow belonged to her. I know her well. She's never mentioned a niece with a car like this. I didn't even slow my pace. I just said, okay. Because honestly, what else do you say to that? Congratulations on maintaining a niece inventory. Karen edged into my path slightly, not fully blocking me, but making it unmistakably clear that she wanted me to stop. So whose car is that? Mine. She let out that little laugh, the one that isn't really a laugh. The sure honey sound. I'm the HOA president. We keep track of all vehicles here for security purposes, and that car is not registered. Well, I don't live here, I said. I'm visiting family. Karen's eyes narrowed. Visitors register too. That wasn't actually true. Visitors weren't required to register unless they were contractors or long-term guests. I knew that because I'd been waved right through the gate plenty of times before. I kept walking. My aunt's gate was open. She always forgets to latch it, which drives Karen absolutely insane, and I was just trying to reach the front door before this turned into a whole production. Karen followed me onto my aunt's property, through the gate. That's when my patience ran out. I turned around and said, "Please don't come inside the gate." She didn't even flinch. "If you actually belong here, you won't mind clarifying things." She glanced past me toward the Porsche, then back at me, like she was witnessing something criminal. "It's probably rented," she said, loud enough that I'm fairly certain she wanted the neighbors to catch it. "Or borrowed. We've had issues with girls." She meant to say something far uglier, but was apparently keeping it polished, bringing men and pretending they live here. Let me be straightforward. She was not being subtle. The entire vibe was very clearly Asian women get money from foreign men, which is offensive in any language. I said, "I'm here to see my aunt. That's all." Karen's smile hardened. "Then tell me your aunt's full name." That's when I understood this wasn't about security at all. This was about humiliation. So I said no. And then I knocked on my aunt's door, because shockingly, I had zero interest in standing on her front porch, proving my family connections to a woman who treats the street like her private estate. My aunt opened the door almost instantly. She's nosy in the most wonderful way, and her whole face brightened the moment she saw me. I stepped inside, and Karen lingered outside for all of about 10 seconds before she actually leaned forward like she was considering following me in. My aunt's expression shifted completely. "What do you think you're doing?" Karen snapped back into her polite in front of elders mode. "Just making sure everything is all right. There's a suspicious vehicle." My aunt looked past her at the Porsche, then back at Karen with the expression of someone who truly couldn't believe their life had come to this. "That is my niece," my aunt said, flat and final. "She comes here all the time." Karen's eyes darted from me to my aunt to the car and back again. Apparently her brain simply could not process messy bun plus Asian woman plus GT3 RS without short-circuiting. "Well," she said, drawing the word out, "it is just unusual." My aunt started to say something sharp, but I did what I always do when my aunt is on the verge of going full Annie mode. I gently steered things in a different direction. "Let's just have coffee," I told her. "It's fine." I figured that would be the end of it. A strange porch encounter, maybe some chatter on a neighborhood Facebook group. Whatever. But no, because I had forgotten the single most important rule about people like Karen. They don't stop when they're wrong. They only stop when they're made to. We were maybe 10 minutes into our coffee, my aunt telling me about the new neighbor's excessively loud motorcycle, me nodding along and pretending to be riveted, when we heard a knock that was definitely not the friendly kind. My aunt checked through the peephole, muttered something in our language that was absolutely not a prayer, and opened the door. 2 police officers were standing there, professional and neutral, but very clearly present for a specific reason. One of them explained there had been a report about a suspicious individual and a suspicious vehicle, possibly casing homes in the area, and asked if everything was all right. My aunt's face did that thing that older women are so skilled at, where they appear completely composed while you can practically feel the heat radiating off of them. "That woman," my aunt said, pointing through the window with the precision of a prosecutor, "called you." One of the officers glanced toward the street. And sure enough, there was Karen, hovering right by the curb, doing her very best concerned citizen pose, arms folded, chin elevated, looking like she was about to receive a commendation. I stepped forward and said, "Hi, I'm her niece. That's my car. I'm just here visiting." The officers asked for my ID. I handed it over. They asked whether the car was mine. I confirmed it was. They asked if I could show the registration. I said, "Of course, it's in the car." We stepped outside with my aunt following right behind me. Karen moved in closer like she was preparing to provide live commentary. I heard her say something to the effect of she refused to properly identify herself and behaved aggressively. Me, in yoga pants, holding a bag of fruit. The officers did their jobs, checked my ID, checked the registration, ran whatever they typically run through their system. Everything checked out perfectly. No drama. No handcuffs, No raised voices. Just an awkward little administrative moment while Karen stood there waiting for a gotcha that never materialized. One officer handed my documents back and said something along the lines of, "All right, ma'am. Sorry for the disturbance." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "You just letting her go?" The officer looked at her, and I swear you could pinpoint the exact moment he decided he did not want to deal with the paperwork this was heading toward. "There's nothing to let go," he said. "She's visiting her family." Karen attempted to pivot. "But that car, it's registered," the officer said. Karen's expression did that particular thing where a person realizes they've lost, but absolutely cannot bring themselves to accept it, because surrendering feels like dying. "Well," she said, volume rising, "how was I supposed to know? She doesn't look like she caught herself." Too late, but she stopped. My aunt, however, did not stop. "You have seen her," my aunt said, her voice climbing. "She visits me every month. You stand out on the street with your clipboard like you personally own everyone on this block, and you still don't know who comes to my home." Karen went red. "I can't be expected to remember every," my aunt pointed directly at her. "You remember. You simply choose not to." The neighbors were paying attention now. Curtains shifting, a few people drifting outside under the guise of watering plants. Someone had their phone out like they'd been waiting all week for exactly this kind of content. Karen attempted to salvage some dignity by shifting into full bureaucratic mode. "I will be reporting this to the board today," she announced, as though that carried any weight at all. My aunt turned around. "Report it." The officers departed. The immediate awkwardness was over, and Karen stomped off like a toddler who dropped their ice cream cone. I probably should have left it there. If she'd simply been an unpleasant neighbor, I most likely would have. I have plenty on my plate, and I don't spend time scheming. But here's the thing. She didn't just embarrass me. She weaponized law enforcement because she couldn't stomach the idea that an Asian woman could own a car like that without an explanation that fit neatly into her worldview. And she did it on my aunt's porch. My aunt, who keeps to herself, pays her bills, and has been quietly absorbing Karen's nonsense for years because she simply doesn't like confrontation. That was the part one couldn't let go of. After I left my aunt's house later that day, I was still irritated in that way, where you keep replaying the whole scene in your mind and inventing better responses you didn't think of in the moment. I called my mom on the drive home and walked her through everything. My mom listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said very casually, "That's subdivision. It's on your grandfather's land." I said, "What?" She repeated it as if she was telling me the current price of something completely ordinary. "Our holding company owns the land beneath it. It's a ground lease. One of your grandfather's old, reliable investments. The property management firm handles the day-to-day, and we just receive reports." I had this vivid mental image of my grandfather, the man who could negotiate like an absolute shark while wearing sandals, signing some document decades ago, and then never bringing it up again because he treated land the way other people treat a savings account. "So the homeowners don't own the land?" I asked. "They own their houses," my mom said. "Not the land the entire development is sitting on. The HOA pays ground rent. It's all very routine." "Why?" And when I told her about Karen, there was a pause. My mom didn't sound angry. She sounded interested, which, if you grew up with my mother, is considerably worse. "Send me her name," she said. "Why?" "Because if she's causing trouble for your aunt, she's probably causing trouble for plenty of other people too. And if the HOA is being run sloppily, it eventually becomes our problem." This is where I should clarify something about my family. We are not the predatory, rich landlord type. We are boring. We lease land to developments through long-term agreements. We hire professional management firms, and we do not micromanage. We simply value stability. My parents' idea of excitement is a delayed shipment. We also have absolutely no patience for being dragged into unnecessary drama. I got home, showered, changed into real clothes, and did something I had genuinely never done in my life before. I opened the shared family drive and searched for the subdivision. And there it was, a scanned ground lease agreement, extensions, amendments, annual summaries, and a folder full of emails from the property management company that I'd never opened because the subject line said things like annual rent remittance confirmation. I started reading, and I discovered three important things. First, The lease contained a rent review clause that triggered every 5 years. Second, it hadn't been reviewed in quite a long time because my family had never initiated it. The rent was perfectly acceptable, and frankly, nobody had cared enough to push it. Third, there was a clause requiring the landowner's explicit approval before any permanent structures or modifications could be made to common areas. Not notify us after the fact, but receive approval before. And based on the files, the HOA had been very creative. A guardhouse upgrade, a modest clubhouse expansion, a pool area that definitely wasn't in the original plans, and various landscaping walls and signage. The kind of additions that look completely normal if you're a resident, but look very much not normal if you're the person whose authorization was supposed to be obtained first. I called the property management company the following day. I didn't charge in making threats. I didn't raise my voice. I simply asked a few questions. Do we still hold the title to the land under the subdivision? Yes, ma'am. Has the rent review been conducted recently? A long pause. Not in quite a while. Why not? A careful response. It's initiated by the landowner. We can flag it, but we can't trigger it without direction. Have you flagged it? Another pause. We've mentioned it in the annual notes. Translation from property management language. They tried, and nobody cared. I said, fine. Next question. Have they ever submitted requests for approval on common area structures? The person on the other end sighed in a way that told me everything I needed to know about this client. No, we've sent reminders and requested documentation. They typically don't respond. I asked, do you have those reminders in writing? Yes. I sat back and stared at my living room wall, because in my imagination, revenge had looked something like publicly embarrassing Karen posting about her online, or somehow getting her removed from the HOA board. But this was something entirely different. This was structural. If Karen wanted to play who belongs here, fine. Let's talk about who actually belongs. I told my mom what I'd found, and she didn't sound surprised. She sounded like someone who'd just discovered the kitchen faucet has been slowly leaking for months and has now decided it's time to fix it properly. If you want to handle this, you can, my mom said. You're old enough. Just don't be reckless. Define reckless. Anything that ends up on the news, she said. Fair enough. So here's what I did. First, I requested a full compliance review from the property management company, which approvals were required, which were missing, and what formal notices had already been issued. Then I requested the HOA's current contact details and official mailing address. Not because I was planning to show up and confront anyone, but because if you're going to do this correctly, you don't fire off an email to someone's personal Gmail and cross your fingers. Then I instructed the property management company to initiate the rent review as specified in the lease. This was not raise the rent because I'm angry. This was trigger the clause that was always there. The rent was genuinely below market value. It had simply been untouched for so long. The review relied on an independent external valuation. I didn't pull a number out of thin air like a cartoon villain. It was professionals doing what they're paid to do. At the same time, I had them send a formal notice regarding the unauthorized common area structures, not a demand to tear everything down tomorrow. The notice essentially stated, you are in violation. Please submit approval requests and as-built documentation within a set time frame. If you wish to retain these structures, apply for retroactive approval and pay the administrative fees specified under the lease. If not, remediate. The critical point here is that I did not want the residents punished for Karen's ego. I wanted the HOA, Karen's little kingdom, to face real consequences for behaving as though the landowner simply didn't exist, because that's exactly what she'd been doing socially as well. She'd been treating the neighborhood as though she personally owned it, controlling who belonged, inventing rules, leaning on people who didn't want conflict. I had no interest in destroying the place. My aunt lives there. I wanted to correct the situation, and I wanted Karen to stop. The first letter went out, then the second. Then the HOA finally responded with a furious email loaded with exclamation points, directed initially not at me, but at the property management company, accusing them of harassment, claiming the HOA had never been informed about approval requirements, suggesting the landowner was trying to take advantage of residents, and demanding the rent remain unchanged for the good of the community. I do love when people put complete nonsense in writing. The property management company forwarded it to me with a note that essentially read, "How would you like us to proceed?" And I said, "Proceed exactly as the lease permits." A few days later, I received my first direct communication from Karen herself, a demand letter. She wrote that I should immediately cease my interference, that the community was private, that she would be pursuing legal remedies, and I genuinely swear I'm not exaggerating, she wrote, "We don't appreciate being bullied by locals with money." Locals with money. I read it twice, just to be absolutely certain I wasn't imagining things. Then I forwarded it to my mom and to the property management company and replied with exactly one sentence. "Please direct all correspondence through the property management company per the ground lease." That was the entirety of my response. Karen could not handle that. Because Karen's power was never real power. It was social power, clipboard power, the I know people power, the kind that works beautifully on neighbors who just want a quiet life, but has absolutely no effect on a lease agreement. A couple of weeks after the notices went out, the HOA called an emergency meeting. My aunt, being my aunt, got herself in the door anyway. She's been there longer than most of the residents, and she knows exactly how to wield politeness as a weapon. She called me afterward, delighted in that way only elderly women can be when they've had a front row seat to genuine chaos. "She's panicking," she said. I asked Karen. My aunt said, "Yes." She stood up and talked about you like you were some kind of criminal, like you had been planning this as a personal attack on her. I asked if anyone actually believed her. My aunt made a small dismissive sound. Some people always side with whoever's the loudest in the room, but not everyone. They're exhausted by her. Apparently, the HOA board had finally come to terms with the fact that their problem wasn't the unreasonable landowner. Their problem was that their budget could not comfortably absorb a rent adjustment, and they had structures that were technically unapproved, meaning they either had to pay the fees to legitimize them or risk being pushed into full remediation. The board wanted a workable compromise. Karen wanted a war. I didn't stop at adjusting the rent. That would have hurt everyone, my aunt included, and the last thing I wanted was for ordinary residents to suffer because Karen is awful. So I took 2 additional steps, both entirely legal, both fully within my rights, and both specifically designed to hit HOA leadership where it hurt while giving the actual residents a viable way forward. First, I offered the HOA a structured transition rather than chaos. Through the property management company, I proposed a phased rent adjustment, still grounded in the review, but rolled out gradually over time. Contingent on full compliance, proper approval submissions, retroactive fees paid for the unauthorized structures, and a commitment to professional governance standards going forward. Essentially, we'll make this manageable, but you will stop pretending the lease doesn't exist. Second, I required the HOA to appoint an independent professional administrator, not Karen, to liaise with the property management company on compliance matters. Not permanently, just through the remediation period. This wasn't me seizing control of the neighborhood. This was me saying, your current leadership has demonstrated they cannot be trusted to fulfill basic obligations. So for a defined period of time, someone qualified will be handling that interface. And yes, I knew precisely who would despise that arrangement the most. Karen. Because Karen's entire identity was built on being the gatekeeper, the one who decides, the one who gets consulted, the one who can corner you on a sidewalk and demand your aunt's full legal name. A professional administrator cuts all of that off at the source. Suddenly, she's just a loud voice in a meeting room. The HOA board pushed back initially. They called it humiliating. They said it was unnecessary. So the property management company sent them the entire email chain. The reminders, the missed approvals, the ignored requests, the years of noncompliance. And my personal favorite detail, Karen's email referring to me as a local with money. That email quietly made the rounds among the board members. Not because anyone had warm feelings toward me. They didn't know me at all. But because even people who don't particularly care about racism tend to dislike blatant stupidity when it comes with a financial price tag. And just like that, Karen was no longer the strong, principled leader protecting the community from outside interference. Karen was the liability. The board agreed to bring on the professional administrator, reluctantly, but they agreed. And then Karen did exactly what she always does when she's backed into a corner. She escalated. She showed up at my aunt's house. My aunt called me in the middle of my next visit. I had driven over in my regular car that time because honestly, I was tired of the Porsche being the neighborhood's main character. She's here, my aunt said, with the calm energy of someone defusing an explosive. Come to the living room. I walked in, and Karen was seated there like she owned the sofa, smiling too widely, speaking too quickly. She'd clearly rehearsed this on the drive over. She said the HOA was considering banning my vehicle from the premises entirely. She said I was disturbing the peace. She said residents had raised concerns about outsiders. And then, because she absolutely cannot help herself, she leaned forward and said something along the lines of, "People like you don't understand how these communities operate. This is an expat area. We maintain standards." My aunt said, very quietly, "Get out of my house." Karen laughed as if my aunt had told a joke. My aunt repeated it, louder this time. "Get out." Karen rose to her feet, her expression tightening. "You will regret." I cut in. "Please put anything you'd like to communicate in an email through the administrator." Karen looked at me with an expression that suggested she very much wanted to slap me, but remembered that real-world consequences existed. She stormed out. My aunt closed the door behind her and immediately said, "I hate her." I said same. 2 days later, the professional administrator took over. And the very first thing they did, because they were competent and entirely without emotional investment, was request the HOA's full records, budgets, approval documentation, vendor contracts, meeting minutes. Care to guess who didn't appreciate that? Care to guess who had been managing every single aspect of it personally? Apparently, Karen had been running HOA operations like her own private notebook. Preferred vendors. Selectively interpreted rules. Fines she issued as she saw fit. The administrator uncovered inconsistencies quickly, the sort of messy, selective governance that thrives in the absence of anyone willing to push back. Suddenly, residents who had been quietly frustrated for years had a legitimate channel to voice their grievances. And they used it. The landscaping crew Karen had accused of theft. That complaint resurfaced. The Asian family she had tried to cite for cultural decorations that weren't actually prohibited under the bylaws. That came up too. Her patterns became visible, and once something like that becomes visible in a community, it spreads fast. The HOA board grew nervous. A full resident meeting was scheduled. I genuinely didn't want to attend. I really didn't. I dislike being the center of attention. But my mom said, "You set this process in motion. You should at least show your face once, calmly." So I went. Still casual. Still not dressed to impress. Because the point was never to prove I'm wealthy. The point was to prove that Karen does not get to decide who belongs. The meeting was messy in the way all community meetings inevitably are. Karen tried to seize control early on during her customary speech about security and standards. This time, though, she got interrupted by multiple residents at once. One man stood up and said, "You called the police on a visitor, on someone's niece, over a car." Karen attempted to justify it. A woman near the front said, "You take photos of people's cars and post them. That's genuinely unsettling." Karen tried to talk over her. And then an older local man, speaking with complete composure, said, "We are here to discuss compliance and finances, not your personal opinions about who looks like they should be driving what." That line landed like a slap. Karen began to unravel. You could see it happening in real time. People like her don't gracefully step back when they lose the room. They flail. She said she was being attacked. She said she was protecting the community. She said the landowner, meaning me, was punishing everyone over a simple misunderstanding. That's when I finally spoke up, and I kept it brief because a monologue was the last thing this needed. I didn't initiate the lease review because I was offended, I said. I initiated it because the HOA has been out of compliance for years. The approvals weren't submitted. The notices were ignored. And the rent review clause exists whether I feel strongly about it or not. Then I looked directly at Karen and added, "And I didn't call the police." "You did." The room went very quiet. Karen attempted to laugh, but came out like a strangled cough. "Well," she said, "you have to understand where I'm coming from. If someone shows up in that kind of car, And without thinking, she said the quiet part out loud. And she looks like that. There it was. The reaction was immediate, not dramatic gasps, but a visible ripple of discomfort that moves through a room when someone says something ugly out in the open. The HOA board chair, a local man who looked like he'd aged 5 years since the meeting began, asked Karen to please stop talking. Karen did not stop talking. She went on about standards and girls and foreign men and security risks posed by cheaply dressed women like me. And then the professional administrator did the single most satisfying thing I have ever witnessed a composed person do. They said, evenly, "Madam, that is not relevant to the agenda. It is also inappropriate." Karen snapped. "And who exactly are you to tell me what's inappropriate?" This woman came waltzing into our neighborhood in a stolen Porsche. You want me to believe someone like her can afford a car like that? And even if she does, she doesn't deserve a car like this. Hardworking people like me deserve nice things, not people like her. I am the president. And the board chair, finally finding his spine, said, "Not anymore." They announced that Karen would be removed as HOA president, effective immediately, and that an interim committee would assume responsibilities alongside the administrator. Karen's face did something I genuinely cannot describe. Like her mind was attempting to rearrange reality and failing. She said it was illegal. She said she would sue. She said the board didn't have that authority. She said she had supporters. And someone from the back of the room said, "Go home." Another voice added, "Stop embarrassing yourself." Karen grabbed her bag and walked out in the middle of the meeting, heels striking the floor with fury, chin held high, performing the classic "I am storming out but please beg me to stay" exit. The HOA worked cooperatively with the administrator from that point forward. They submitted proper documentation for all the structures and ended up paying the retroactive administrative fees, which again isn't me being vindictive. It is literally what the agreement specifies for unauthorized modifications. They accepted a stepped rent adjustment to avoid financial shock for residents. And if Karen ever crosses paths with that yellow Porsche again, she can think back on the day she tried to play gatekeeper and inadvertently reminded me that some gates actually have owners. Edit, because people keep asking what ultimately happened to Karen. Last week, I was catching up over a meal with a friend who works in immigration services. I mentioned the HOA Karen who had tried to have me arrested over a Porsche. My friend set down her tea and looked at me with wide eyes. "Wait," she said. "Was her name Karen?" It turns out that when Karen relocated, she drew some attention. While she'd been busy running her HOA kingdom, it seems she had allowed her own paperwork to fall completely apart. Quite a lot of it. My friend told me that Karen had been residing in the country on a specific category of visa that strictly prohibits any form of paid work. Yet she had been quietly operating an unregistered consulting business for years. She had never declared the income, never paid taxes on it, and hadn't kept her registered address current. Someone, and I genuinely don't know who, though my aunt has been wearing a particularly self-satisfied expression lately, alerted the local immigration bureau and tax authorities. Karen was subsequently arrested for tax evasion and visa fraud. The authorities here have zero tolerance for foreigners who operate as though the law doesn't apply to them. She spent a week in a detention facility, which I can guarantee met none of her HOA standards, was hit with a fine substantial enough to wipe out whatever savings she had, and was then deported. She is now permanently barred from re-entering the country. The woman who tried to gatekeep me from my own family's land because I didn't fit her image of someone who belonged there got expelled from the entire country because, as it turned out, she was the one who didn't actually belong. And the next story is a malicious compliance piece titled, "You are not to get involved in your mom's Facebook stuff." So my dad said those exact words to me years ago when I jumped into an argument with my mom over some ignorant racist comment she posted on Facebook. Facebook has a way of drawing out the absolute worst in my mom. Someone who in real life used to be a genuinely wonderful woman, but over the years has gotten completely consumed by her own echo chamber of nonsense. I tried to pull her out of it, but I was told in no uncertain terms that I am not to get involved in my mom's Facebook activity. Well, today there was an unlawful protest in my city, a demonstration organized on Facebook by the lowest tier of our society. About 100 people, deluded enough to actually leave their keyboards and physically disrupt public transport in my city, showed up in the name of the people. My parents weren't among the organizers, but they appeared to be very much on their way to becoming part of the 100. The protest was illegal. Participants were ordered to disperse. They refused, and they were arrested. They didn't have any identification on them, so they weren't permitted to leave. My dad then called me this afternoon for the first time, asking me to go to their house, retrieve their IDs, and bring them to the police station. I asked if this was connected to the Facebook event. He confirmed it was. I said I'd better not get involved then. I hung up and ignored the next 17 calls. My aunt apparently went to collect them later that evening, and now the entire family is furious with me and calling me a traitor, except for my grandmother, who called just to tell me she misses me. And I haven't been able to wipe the grin off my face since. And yeah, everyone, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again tomorrow.